Today on the 10-12 podcast, Kelley Ford has put out his first preseason ratings, so we welcome him back to the show to break them down and look at a few of the teams specifically. Then we've got an alleged scandal involving Houston softball. Scott and Holman Pawdcast are going to join us to discuss the news that they are currently in the process of breaking, plus Texas Tech looking for a new softball head coach and plans for the summer for the 10-12 podcast.
Before history is written, it's played. Before it's frozen in time, it's fought one shift at a time. Before it's etched in silver, it's carved in ice. What happens next will last forever. The Stanley Cup Final on ABC and ESPN Plus begins Saturday.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
Welcome to the 10-12, the podcast that covers all 14 teams in the Big 12 Conference, plus Colorado, Arizona State, and Utah. We are the flagship show, the 10-12 Network. Find every show on the network at 1012network.com, and we are partners with Sport Social, Europe's biggest sports podcast network. I'm your host, Philip Slavin. We're back after a little bit of a brief hiatus. Look, man, that the intro's getting a little bit weird. Like the idea. All right, I'm feeling a little scatterplot. Oh. All right, two thoughts. One, saying 14 teams now is weird. Texas and Oklahoma are still in the conference until July 1st, so for a little under a month. But for all intents and purposes, they're no longer members of the Big 12. Like, there are no more Big 12 events that Texas and Oklahoma will be a part of. So basically, they're gone. They're done. Okay, cool. Bye. See ya. It's been fun. Thanks. Or what is it? So long, and thanks for all the fish. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Welcome, Colorado. Welcome, Arizona State, Utah. Welcome to all of you. I won't change the intro until we get to July 1st and it all changes over. So just what it's going to be. Okay. I have a date. I have a plan. I'm going to stick to the plan. Speaking of plans, I have a bit of a plan for this summer for the podcast. It does involve cutting back a bit. It will be a bit inconsistent. We will do something for the 30th / the 1st when the corner four, Colorado, Arizona State, and Utah officially join the conference. Yeah, I'm still going to try and have some new podcasts in the network. By then, I won't have all four schools covered. It's just not going to happen. I've been trying to find a better podcast / work / life balance. As I sit here this year, growing closer to turning 40, which happens in September, I make a lot of jokes about having 3 kids. Like, haha, it's because I have 3 kids. Well, I do have 3 kids, and they are young, and they do take up a lot of time, and I mean that in a good way. The girls, the 2 older ones, they're all girls. The 2 older girls started softball, and I love it. It's fun. It's great. Especially when you watch a almost 4-year-old wearing a batting helmet that's, huge on her, and then running with it on after hitting the softball off the tee. 4 and under's tee, 5 and 6 is a coach pitch, and if they don't, then they hit off the tee. Anyways, y'all, fathers of daughters, girl dads, you know what I'm talking about. If you've done softball, I love it. And so this summer, I'm just going to kind of wing it. I've got a couple of show ideas I want to do, and so I'm going to keep working to get those ready. Like I said, we'll do some sort of probably live show for the 30th to welcome the new teams on the 1st. And I do have, because I'm cutting back, I do have one thing that I'm excited about. One big week in July that will come after Media Days. Big 12 Media Days are like, the 9th and 10th or the 10th and 11th? I can't remember if it's Tuesday, Wednesday, or Wednesday, Thursday. I won't be there. It's in Vegas this year. I'm not going. But we're going to do something here for 5 nights in mid-July. We're going to call it 10-12 Rankings Week. 5 shows, 5 nights in a row, all live on our YouTube channel. We'll post the episodes in podcast form the next day. And we're going to do 5 different rankings. And so that includes like top transfers in the Big 12 this year. So I think it's like top 10 transfers, 12 most important games on the schedule, and then our actual like rankings. So we're going to do rankings, 5 different ones, 5 live shows, 2 guests each night, 1 person from in the network and 1 person kind of nationally from outside of the network. I've got all the guests lined up except for 1 more internal. And this is going to be because I'm not going to be doing this twice a week or even weekly throughout the summer, I wanted to have one big thing. So I'm going to go ahead and start teasing it and dropping information about it. I'm getting really excited about it. We're going to put a lot of work and effort into trying to make it a cool thing. So I hope you guys kind of, we'll put out details of exact dates closer to. I have an idea of what that is, but you know what happens if you start announcing things too early, then stuff gets in the way. So that's kind of the plan. We'll start getting hot and heavy again in August before the season starts. But this is what I got to do. This is just how it has to be. I've got to. This has been the hardest year, I think. And I love doing this. And I don't know. There's something to when I started doing this. The only other Big 12 podcast really was there was Heartland, and there was Big 12 Country. And now there's Big 12 shows everywhere, and they do a great job. I mean, there's 365 covers, college sports nationally, but they've got Big 12 Watch with Josh Neighbors, and John Kurtz does a great job, and Go Pawdcast got a Big 12 show now, and there's still Heartland, and there's more Big 12 shows popping up left, right, sideways, all over the place, and that's great. That's great for the Big 12 to continue to have more people out there representing the conference, talking about it, promoting it. This is a good thing. It's a good thing. But there's enough out there now, and people do different things than me, and some do the same things that I do, and that's fine. And so, look, some of them are single or childless or have the full capacity to do more. Some of them are younger. That's awesome. And that's great. I love it. And I understand my limitations, or I'm trying to. And so, just going to come back this summer and do less. Fewer episodes significantly, but I am trying to put more into those so that they are better. So, that's kind of the plan. I'm thrilled about today's episode. I love having Kelley Ford on. You guys know him, KFordRatings, Kelley Ford. We've had him on the show for a few years now, a couple times a year. He just dropped his preseason ratings last week. So I immediately was like, Kelley, you gotta come on. I want to be the first show after your ratings drop for the Big 12. We won't hit on every team in his ratings. I will hit quite a few of them. We'll get him back on to dive more into some of the other teams as well. So always a good time having K Ford on. Always a good time talking with Kelley. And then some softball scandal in Houston. Scott and Holman Pawdcast breaking down some allegations against head coach Kristen Vesely in the program. So Dustin of Scott and Holman Pawdcast are going to join us, kind of discuss some of that. I would suggest you go and listen to the Scott and Holman Podcast. They're going to continue to cover this story. They've had a ton more people former players and assistants and staff reach out to them and talk to them. So they're going to continue to follow that story. Go check out that show. Listen to Dustin. It's really good stuff. And Texas Tech. The funny thing is, there's this alleged Houston scandal, and Texas Tech is the softball head coaching position that's now open because Coach Craig Snyder has resigned his position to go and be an assistant at Tennessee. And I know Texas Tech fans are not thrilled about this, and there's been some questions to exactly how did you lose a head coach to go be an assistant? I will note, and I think most people who are Texas Tech fans and concerned about this are at this point aware of this fact, because we don't know why exactly Snyder is resigned to go take an assistant position at Tennessee. Maybe it's because it's the SEC. Maybe it's a lack of resources at Texas Tech. It really did feel like he was building something there at Texas Tech. I mean, one of the top recruiting classes in the country coming in for this year or for next season. It's tough. It's tough. It's really tough for Texas Tech because this is now the fourth head coach in the last 5 years. We had two players on who had recruited by one and then played for the third. So this is the fourth coach in a 6-year period. And it's really the fifth coach in an 8-year period. It's some of them though, those are scandals. What we have here is a coach leaving his position to become an assistant. Here's the deal though. Tennessee is hiring both Craig Snyder and Stephanie Sanders, who's an assistant at Penn State. Well, guess what? Coach Snyder and Coach Sanders are engaged to be married this summer. Ironically, Tennessee lost two assistants, a married couple who became the co-head coaches at Auburn. And so now Tennessee's replacing that married couple with what will be a married couple on their coaching staff as well. So that obviously has something to do with this and is obviously playing into this decision. I don't know if Texas Tech told Craig Snyder, no, you can't hire your wife on staff. And if he asked and if they said no, that's understandable. If your first reaction is, well, you should just let him hire her. Let's pause that for a second and think about the fact that you would allow a head coach to hire his wife to be an assistant. Set all the credentials and merits of that aside, I can understand why that might be a concerning situation. Hiring a married couple to be assistants on a staff that are not related to you, that's one thing. Hiring family, and we understand that happens all the time across all sports. Football coaches hire sons join staffs, yada yada yada. I get all of that. It's a little bit weird it's a little bit kind of when it happens. A little bit of nepotism there sometimes, but I also understand why an athletic department would be concerned about someone hiring their wife to be on the coaching staff. You set a precedent that next time someone goes, well, I want to hire my husband, and I want to hire my wife, and I want to hire so-and-so. You should be making those decisions, but it does potentially lead to a slippery slope. Again, I'm speculating. I don't know if they told him no. I don't know if he asked. I don't know if there's other things at play here besides just that. But Texas Tech will be hunting for a new head coach to run their softball program. This news, of course, broke on Sunday, so there's not a lot of information beyond that as of this point. Texas Tech did announce that they're searching that the search has begun. Some names to consider: Ronnie DeLong at North Texas. They haven't been quite as good the last couple seasons. Maybe he's not as hot of a commodity as he was. Becky Clark at South Alabama would be interesting. You may have to go the assistant route. Eric Leba at A&M. I don't know. I have no idea at this point. It's too early. But Texas Tech, a program gonna be looking for another head coach. Again, I hate it. I like Snyder. This sucks for Texas Tech because it seemed like things are turning around. So, follow us on Twitter at 1012 Network. Follow us on Threads at 1012pod. Follow us on Instagram at 1012pod. If you are a first-time listener or a long-time listener, if you listen on iTunes and haven't taken the time to leave us a 5-star rating and a review, I would really appreciate it. We have an email, 1012podcast@gmail.com. If you want to hit me up, got some thoughts, want to talk about kids playing softball or kids playing sports, or how you find work-life podcast or work-life side gig, side fun, hustle balance, send it my way. Send it my way. I'm really trying to do a lot of stuff to try and improve myself this summer. Just because, look, I'm a dad, and it's important, and I need to be as good a dad as I can. And so I got to find what ways to do that. And one of them is to do podcasts less in my free time when it keeps me up on Sunday and Wednesday night until midnight or later doing it. It's just not healthy. I've got to get more sleep, and I'm trying to. So, before we get to our guests, y'all know Charlie Hustle, sponsors here on the 1012 podcast and for the network as a whole. Vintage-inspired clothing company based out of Kansas City that absolutely loves the Big 12. Love everything they're doing over there. If you live in the Kansas City area, you're a fan of Kansas City teams like the Royals or the soccer teams there, they've got a ton of stuff you're absolutely going to love. So look, they're based in Kansas City, and so they love everything Kansas City. So if you're a Kansas City fan, you should go and check them out. If you're a Big 12 fan, you should go and check them out. They love the Big 12. They continue to strengthen their relationship with the Big 12. They've got some absolutely great stuff for every current Big 12 team. They've got Colorado. Look, this is a heads up. Stuff's coming this summer. They've got stuff planned this summer. It will start not this week. Let's keep stuff on the down low. All I'll say is this. Stuff starts in June. And there's big stuff in July. And there's big stuff in August. There's lots of stuff if you're a Big 12 fan of a current or soon-to-be conference member to get excited about. So here's what you need to do. You need to remember the promo code 101215, TEN1215, for 15% off all non-sale items. I got a bunch of stuff still on sale. Great sales going on. Great discounts on fantastic Big 12 gear. Go to charliehustle.com. You got something on sale? Great. If it's not, 101215, TEN1215 for 15% off all non-sale items. Go shop Charlie Hustle. Support the companies that support us. Again, they love the Big 12. They put out good stuff. Go check out charliehustle.com. All right, two great interviews. Kelley Ford. Let's talk about some preseason ratings. And then Dustin from Scott and Holman Pawdcast. We've got an alleged scandal we need to break down. Let's get to it.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
Oh, man. Everyone has that point in the year where the season starts for them. For some people, it is the first game day. For some people, it is media days. For some people, it's the release of a specific magazine. For me, I know that the new college football season is here. It's time. Once Kelley Ford starts dropping graphics on social media about his projections for the upcoming season. So, of course, when he dropped Big 12 first on Twitter, because I know Kelley's got a massive Big 12 following, I had to reach out and say, look, the first podcast you have to go on is this one. We got to get you on here. And so, of course, joining us today is one of the most popular, unless you're a West Virginia fan oftentimes, prognosticators and predictors of college football. He is Kelley Ford, KFordRatings on Twitter. Kelley, welcome back, man.
Philip, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I always love coming on the 1012 Network podcast and talking Big 12 football. You mentioned West Virginia. Hey, I think they might like the projections this year a little bit more than they have in years past. Probably still not as much as they would like to like them, but that's every fan base out there. And you mentioned, having a decent Big 12 following. I would say I do, at least for my standards. And I would attribute a large percent of the responsibility of that to you, Philip, to your colleagues at the 1012 Network, and because you've allowed me to come on here in the past. So always an honor. I'm excited. And yes, I always start with the Big 12 because I always know Big 12 fans are going to engage and interact, usually positively, which of course I do appreciate.
Of course. Look, and as always, it's preseason stuff. This is all based off of math and data, what Kelley does. This is not just feels, vibes, and opinions. If you want to be angry about those kinds of things, there are plenty of people in the media to complain to. Now, you're welcome to argue with Kelley in the comments, in the replies of social media, and he will engage oftentimes with people who are respectful. No reason to be name-calling or just a troll. Kelley is a great person to get into the conversations with. So before we dive into your Big 12 rankings, kind of explain to everybody your process so that they understand where these rankings, these preseason rankings and numbers are coming from.
Yeah, absolutely, Philip. So really in the preseason, we're looking at three main things. You're looking at returning production. So what percentage of production on offense, defense, special teams, positional units, what percentage are you bringing back from last year's team? And I've also now captured for the last couple of years transfers in my returning production numbers. And we know that, production at school X is not necessarily going to translate exactly 1-to-1 to a new school. So I have, modifier sliders for, is this student athlete transferring from a higher level of competition, a lower level of competition, an FCS type level, a non-division 1 level. All of those things are taken into account, but returning production is the largest piece of my preseason power ratings. I also look at your recent recruiting over the course of the last few years. How well has your program recruited talent? And I've changed the weights of these inputs as we've seen a shift in how programs are built, right? There are some programs, such as, in the Big 12, Colorado, who's gone really transfer heavy and really hasn't recruited at the high school level as much, at least in Deion's first and second year as the head coach. There are other programs who haven't used the transfer portal as much. Clemson comes to mind. I know that's not a Big 12 school, but that's the one that everyone kind of points to as they haven't used the portal. And then, of course, there's the 132 others that are somewhere in between those two on that spectrum. So I've tweaked the percent weight that goes into the model for your returning production, which includes transfers for your high school recruiting. And then also the third and final component of the preseason power ratings is, what is your recent KFord rating been? How has your team performed from a power rating standpoint on the field in the last few years? Last year gets the most weight, then you go back 2 years, 3 years. And again, I've tweaked that as well because in this new era of college football, there's so much change happening. But in terms of roster management, roster building, you can change over a roster in the transfer portal era much more quickly than you could in the pre-portal era. So, how good was your team 4 years ago? That probably matters less in 2024 than it did if we were doing preseason power ratings in 2018, for example. So I tweaked all these weights. We've done a bunch of back testing, figured out what's the optimal, at least for now, and we'll continue to tweak that moving forward as we get more data in this new world, new era of college football. But Phil, all those things come together. I'm then able to produce a singular number. For example, I'll look at Kansas State, who comes out as the number 1 power rated team. Spoiler alert, in my Big 12 projections. They have a power rating right now. The singular number is 14.2. That means that my model suggests Kansas State is 14.2 points better than the average FBS team on a neutral field. So if Kansas State was playing the average FBS team on a neutral field, I would make them about a 2-touchdown favorite. That's what the power rating number means. I've also broken it down and started publishing this year the unit rankings. So how is Kansas State and every other team's offense comparing to the other offenses in FBS? How about their defense? How about their special teams? I'm not showing the ratings. I'm showing the ordinal rank 134 in the preseason. I will begin showing those ratings at a deeper level as we get going into the season. So that's where we are in the preseason. I'm able to then to use those power ratings to project how is each team going to do against their schedule this year. And that's how we get to our average projected conference wins, our percent chance to win X number of conference games, a projected overall record on the season, a percent chance to make a bowl game, a percent chance to win, 10 games or more, and a percent chance to go undefeated. All of that is able to be generated from the power ratings. I can then do schedule difficulty rankings and compare, how would the average FBS team, how would the number 12 FBS team do against that schedule, given that schedule, the location of those games, and then compare that to how is that team actually doing. We can normalize all 134 FBS schedules. That way we can look at, who plays the most difficult collection of opposing FBS offenses. What about defenses? all of these things can be derived because we have the power ratings here in the preseason. And then once we get in the preseason, we replace, the preseason component. That preseason gets phased out, that weight, and it gets replaced, of course, with the in-season data. And then we're really rolling, by about 3 or 4 weeks into the year.
I like the concept of calling weighting teams and how they use the transfer portal the Debo to Dion scale.
There you go.
And where do you fall? Where does your team fall in the Debo to Dion scale about how much they rely on transfer portal?
That's perfect. That's perfect.
Roster, just like a little graphic with their heads on it. It's a perfect visual. Okay, so you do have Kansas State as your preseason favorite. I think that you have Kansas State 1 and Utah 2. We'll kind of start there, which kind of aligns with the way everyone's talked about the Big 12 this offseason, right? As Kansas State, Utah seem like the kind of the favorites. I'm going to use air quote favorite because in the Big 12 this year, the distance between Team 1 and Team 6 and 7 is not as great, I would bet. Let me start with this because I know you haven't put out projections for everybody yet. Big 12 is the first. We're going to continue to drop everybody week by week. So I'm going to throw questions at you I didn't prepare you for. Is it fair to state that the distance between the top team in the Big 12 versus like 5, 6, 7 is smaller than any other power conference there is?
Yes, if you get all the way down to 6, 7, even 8, certainly. There are some other conferences who, within the top 3 or 4 teams might have a more competitive grouping from number 1 to 4. But if you want to throw in that next level, that next layer of 5, 6, 7, I would say in the Big 12, even 8, certainly that is the most competitive of the Power 4 conferences. And I think that's fun and exciting because it creates an element of unknown. I mean, so many new teams, yes, but also which one of these teams is going to pop, we really don't know. And that's in a normal year. This year, that's kind of taken to the nth degree in the Big 12, Philip.
I like to remind everybody, since the Big 12 title game came back, whoever's been preseason number 2 has not made the title game, has not done it in the preseason media poll. We see teams like preseason number 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 making that title game on a regular basis. Oklahoma was always 1 and they made it all the time. Texas was preseason 1 last year and they made it. But oftentimes we're seeing teams make that who are anywhere from 3 to 8 in preseason poll make the Big 12 title game because the Big 12 doesn't have the level of recruiting at the teams at the top of the Big 10 and the SEC and even the ACC. And because of that, it becomes about development cycles. It's all about development cycles in the Big 12 and where you are on that as to who's going to have a successful season. And so as we go through this, I always remind everybody, like the notion that how could you pick this team who's picked preseason 7 to get there? How can you even see a path for them? I'm like, because that's the Big 12. Like that is what happens every year as teams rise up. Teams come out of nowhere based off of our expectations of a team. And so you have to start doing things, looking for opportunities and paths to try and predict those things with an understanding of like, I don't hold it against anybody who's like, I thought so-and-so and so-and-so would make it to Arlington. Who the heck knows? It's a crapshoot. And in the Big 12, without Oklahoma and Texas, it's even more, to me, wide open than it's ever been. That doesn't mean that you're not going to have teams at the end of the year that are really, really good. Like, we're not going into the years because they get to the Big 12 title game and it's 2 8-4 teams and it's just everybody's garbage and that's why you couldn't predict it. It's hard to know who's going to be the top teams in the conference. And now you throw in this year, similar to last year, whereas we used to have a round robin, everybody played everybody. You have imbalanced schedules. You have 8 teams who are still either brand new or fairly new in just their second season in the conference. There's still a lot of lack of familiarity. You have coaching changes. This should be, in theory, the most volatile season we've seen in the Big 12 because of all the change, because of all the newness, because you have so much turnover, and because, honestly, there is some returning talent here that makes this conference interesting. And it is always the conference that, at the end of the day, this is where things come to get tested, and then everyone steals it and throws 5 stars into it to make it look like they are even more awesome, right?
I couldn't agree more, Philip. I'm right there with you on everything you said. You said it more eloquently than I probably could have. I quickly there looked at my 4 Power 4 conference projection graphics, which again, I have not posted any except for the Big 12 on social media or the website yet. But as I go through them, the Big 10 has the most concentration at the top with, the number of teams that realistically have a chance to win that conference. Then it's the SEC, and it makes sense, as you just said, how recruiting works. Then the ACC, the Big 12 comes in as I will say, the least clarity. And yes, Kansas State, we're going to get into this, but yes, Kansas State and Utah are the number 1 and the number 2. But then, Phil, there are actually 8 other teams. So not 8 total. There are now, I would say, 10 total teams out of 16 that if you wanted to make a case, they'd be in Arlington. I would listen from a numbers standpoint, like solely, like just from a numbers standpoint. That doesn't even get into the nuances of a team, of a coaching staff, of a scheme, of those development cycles that you talked about, who's peaking at the exact right moment to take advantage in this given year of 2024. Like if you even went down that road, maybe you could even introduce 1 or 2 more. The numbers would push back a little bit if you go beyond 10. But hey, 10 out of 16 teams have a realistic numbers chance to make it to a conference championship game. That is incredible. The opportunity is there, and I am so excited to see which 2 of those 10 are able to seize the opportunity in front of them and actually play in that Big 12 championship game, because unlike any year before, Philip, for better or for worse, in this case, I think it's probably a good thing. The winner of that game, it's not a guarantee because of how it's structured, but for all intents and purposes, it's a guarantee. The winner of that game is going to get a bye, not just but get a bye in the 12-team CFP. And then you're 1 game away from the semis, and who knows what happens. So there is so much on the line in the Heartland this year, and in Arlington at the end of the year. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Anybody who wants to follow along or whatever, you feel free to go to KFordRatings.com. He's got everything posted there. Of course, he has everything posted on Twitter. Sometimes you get to do a little bit of scrolling. So the easiest place to do is go to KFordRatings.com. You can follow along and see all the graphics there. I'm going to run through your 1 through 16 projected standings in the conference. Starting at the top, at Kansas State at 1, Utah 2, Arizona, Oklahoma State, Kansas round out the top 5, followed by TCU, Texas Tech at 7, UCF at 8, Iowa State 9, West Virginia 10. You mentioned those top 10. You have all 10 of those teams within 2 games, a 2-game standing, as in a projected conference record. Behind that, Baylor at 11, Cincinnati, BYU, Colorado, Houston, and Arizona State are going to probably have a rough season. I think we all project that. I want to start by looking at this 10-team kind of stretch, because again, people are like, well, who are your top teams? I think it's A and B. And I'm like, how do you come into this and say, this team's going to win, this team's going to win? It's why, like, I kind of am coming around to this notion that UCF is my dark horse team, and then people want to push back on it. I'm like, first of all, let's remember what a dark horse is. Dark horse is like, it's a team that you aren't going to pick to get there, but you can see some, no, there's no way. And I'm like, West Virginia is a team that you can claim as if you call them a dark horse, they get mad because they won so many games last year. They're like, well, how could you pick us there? The schedule's harder this year. Iowa State, Texas Tech, like, if you put out a graphic of 10 Big 12 teams and said, which one's going to make the conference championship game, you're going to get 100 different variations from those 10 teams, because that's how wide open this actually feels. I want to kind of go through a little bit some of the teams here. Like, Kansas State is really interesting to me, because we talk about development cycles, and we're not used to seeing in the Big 12, outside of Oklahoma during their run, a team maintain status atop the conference standings. Now, Kansas State won the conference 2 years ago. They lost a tiebreaker, and they fell 1 game back, like bringing back as much as they did last year. It reminds me of Iowa State when they got there the COVID year and then couldn't follow it up. It's really hard to get there year after year after year after year. And then to have some of the turnover they've had, I mean, replacing most of the offensive line. I know they're giving a ton back on defense. New offensive coordinator, quarterback who we are all very high on, in Avery Johnson, but still going to be a first-time starter, replacing a ton on your offensive line. You do bring back a really good running back room. And then you look at this projection, and they are favored in every single game on the schedule. I understand there's the difference between like the team on paper and the numbers. And this is why I like having these conversations with you, because you bring the numbers, and numbers change as we get more information throughout the season, right? It's interesting to kind of see this and say people are very high on Kansas State. especially around those in the Big 12. And then you take the look at that and say, based off our history of the Big 12, it's really hard to see Kansas State not taking a slight step back with all the things that they have going with them, because history tells me, and everybody wants to start pointing out, well, this team, I understand that. History tells me Kansas State's going to take a year back because they are not at the peak of a development cycle right now. Why are your numbers so favorable toward Kansas State, to the fact that, again, you have them favored in every single game on the schedule? The closest game, I'm using air quotes right now, is a 57% chance to win at West Virginia in Week 8.
Yeah, Phil, it's a really fair question. I don't disagree with any of the nuanced approach or considerations that are being made when people say or think that about Kansas State. The numbers actually suggest too, Philip, that Kansas State is going to take a step back. Last year, Kansas State, and Kansas State fans probably don't want to hear that, but they finished last year in my power ratings number 11. That's actually one spot higher than they were in 2022 when they won the Big 12 conference. Like, from a number standpoint, from a power rating standpoint. And I know I have to really slow down on that point, because people say, how can you say a team that didn't win the conference title is better than a team that did? Hey, the team in 2022 earned it. They deserved it. They did not luck into that Big 12 championship. They got it done on the field. They deserved that title, that trophy. What I'm suggesting is maybe there was a little bit of luck, a bounce of the ball that went their way in 22 that then did not go their way in 23, despite actually having, from a number standpoint, a more talented team overall. In particular, on the offensive side of the ball, last year it was a top 10 offense. I actually finished number 6 in my offensive unit rankings in 2023. So if we're looking at 2024 projection, last year they finished 11. Coming into this year, they're number 17. The offense takes a step back, still top 20, but they take a slight step back. The defense up a few spots in my projections compared to last year's year end. So overall, I do think Kansas State might actually be a little bit less talented this year. The difference is, when you look at the conference now, the Big 12, relative to the other teams that are in that conference this year, Kansas State, by my numbers here in the preseason, version 1 of the power ratings, still comes out as the most talented team. And then, Philip, almost more importantly, when I mentioned earlier, I could do schedule difficulty rankings, and it's not just your overall schedule difficulty, which includes non-conference, which interestingly for Kansas State, that does include a home game against Arizona. Week 3, Friday night, Arizona will go to Kansas State. That is not a game that's going to count in the Big 12 standings. That's important for both of those teams, because those are two teams that I have projected, in the top 3 or 4 of power ratings in the Big 12. So it's going to be a good litmus test in that week to say, where are we relative to the other maybe projected top teams in our conference? But the stakes are not, we just got a loss or picked up a loss in the column of conference games. So that the non-league schedule difficulty is included in the overall, but also what I'm doing in the preseason in particular is looking at how difficult is your conference slate. And it is important to note that teams that have a higher power rating are going to be more inclined to have a lower level of schedule difficulty because they can't play themselves. Teams that don't have the opportunity to play the best team or teams in the conference because you are that, of course, it makes sense intuitively that your conference schedule difficulty might be lower. But Kansas State, even with that in mind, has the number 16 out of 16 conference scheduled difficulty. So from the perspective of the average team looking at Kansas State's Big 12 schedule, they have the easiest schedule in the Big 12 out of any team in this conference this year. So when you have the number 1 power rated team by my numbers, even if they're not quite at the same level they were a year ago, you combine that with the fact that they play, by my numbers, the easiest conference schedule. It makes sense that you're going to end up with the highest average projected number of conference wins, which for Kansas State is 7.0. So as you mentioned, I do have Kansas State favored, meaning a 50% or greater win percentage, or expected win percentage in every single game that they're playing. But my numbers still expect Kansas State to lose about 2 games on average in conference play, anywhere from 2 to 3 overall on the season. Just a 5% chance to go 12-0, despite being favored in all 12 of those games.
Well, again, looking based off the projections of your top 8 teams, Kansas State, Utah, Arizona, OSU, Kansas, TCU, Texas Tech, UCF, Kansas State plays only 2 of them in conference because Arizona's a non-conference game. So in conference play, they play 2 of them in conference in OSU and Kansas, and they're both at home. And so, based off of that, it's why Kansas State. I get it. Schedule strength now is such a bigger deal. And when you are the top team, if you're the top projected team, you don't play yourself, you're immediately going to have an easier schedule than everybody else. And when you avoid the top 2 teams, And technically in conference play, you avoid the top 3 teams because Arizona non-conference game. That's going to set yourself up for what looks like an easier schedule. Now, I always want to preface everything by saying this. Everything in the preseason is preseason. Things change. We thought last year West Virginia was going to have the most difficult schedule in the Big 12. It turned out to be a lot easier than we thought based off how teams actually finished the season. It's not to shoot at West Virginia or say they didn't have a good year and they didn't accomplish something. Like everyone's like, whoa, now it's an easy schedule. Yeah. Like that, things change. New data comes in. We can change our opinion on information. So looking at this right now, that's the projection. We know once conference play starts, there are going to be teams that we think aren't going to be good in the Big 12 who are going to be a whole lot better than we thought. There are going to be teams who we thought were going to be really good who aren't going to be as good as we thought. That's just how this works every single year when you have a conference that is as volatile and relies on development as much as the Big 12 does. So, all preseason studies and stuff, that's why preseason stuff is just for fun and a way to start familiarizing yourself with teams and start forming preseason biases. Okay.
With threats to our nation waiting around every corner, adaptability is more important than ever. When conditions change without notice, quick strategic thinking is crucial. And with obstacles consistently impending, determination is essential in overcoming them. It's this willingness, decisiveness, and resilience that sets Marines apart. With our fighting spirit, we don't just fight battles, we win them. Marines are the constant our nation counts on to fight the unknown. And through adaptable problem solving, we do just that. Learn more at marines.com.
Utah, whose fans believe that they're going to come in and run this conference.
I realized that when I posted on social media, Philip, just how strongly Utah fans feel that this is now their conference, even in year one. So that was interesting education for me. I'm sure you've been dealing with it for months.
Utah is an interesting one. Look, I'm glad Utah's in the Big 12. I am. I think they have a very passionate fan base. I think they fit with the Big 12. I think they fit as a Big 12 team because of their passion for their program. Period. End of story. Absolutely. I also think that it's perfect. I think there's some good Utah fans out there who are reasonable and fun to talk to and have easy conversation with. And there are some Utah fans who, I get it, are still very emotional about what happened to the Pac-12 and their history and everything. Like, I think Utah as a program and fan bases are more like Big 12 programs and fan bases than either side actually realize. And it'll take some time to get there. But for right now, Utah is going to be the villain of the Big 12. Maybe even more so than Colorado. It's whatever. And that's okay. Like, lead into it. Have some fun with it. And I do think Utah is going to be an absolute grind to have to play. I do think Utah is interesting here, joining the Big 12. Similar to Kansas State, another team who plays a Big 12 team in non-conference. They have Baylor in week 2. Gotta love that. Look, it's weird as all get out, and it means more losses in the conference, and that's not the best thing, but whatever. Looking at Utah, you have them one game where they are not favored, 43% at Oklahoma State. They avoid Kansas State, which is big. They avoid Kansas, which is big. The schedule, though, not nearly as, in my opinion, it's not nearly as easy as Kansas State's, despite avoiding Kansas State and Kansas as what Kansas State has in front of them.
Yeah, I agree that it's not quite as easy, but I would probably be a little bit softer in my classification of it, Philip, because interestingly, and I promise it's not going to be this way, the highest power rated team plays the 16th most difficult schedule. The number 2 plays the 15th. It won't be like that all the way through. But here I am saying the number 2 power rated team in the Big 12, Utah, at number 19. That's their KFord power rating rank out of all 134 teams. So just 2 spots behind Kansas State in the national rankings. They do play, by my numbers, the second easiest conference slate in the Big 12. They're number 15 out of 16. Only Kansas State has an easier one. And this is really buoyed by the fact that Utah this year plays the number 68 most difficult collection of opposing FBS defenses out of the Power 4. There are 68 Power 4 teams, and not a single one of them plays a easier collection of opposing FBS defenses than Utah. So on a week-in, week-out basis, they're going to see a relatively weaker opponent on the defensive side of the ball than any of their Power 4 counterparts. So I think that really speaks to Utah's ability and upside this season because, they're going to get Cam Rising back. And if you go back 2 years ago with Cam Rising at the helm, and this offense was number 18 in the country. Last year, they regressed all the way to number 71. I was under the impression that Cam Rising was going to play. I think a lot of people were, and it became apparent early on that nope, he's actually not. And we saw what that did. He's coming back this year. It's a top 40 projection. The defense could be top 10 level, as it always is in Salt Lake. It feels like it's always a really good unit there. This could actually be the best defense of the CFP era, though, for Utah. And that's saying a lot because, like I said, the level of play on that side of the ball in Salt Lake City has been tremendous, really, for the last 10 plus years. 6.5 projected conference wins for the Utes. So that's a half game behind Kansas State. But again, we're in the margins of error here. And as you said, projections are going to change. Things are going to happen. Utah fans, they should feel good about their opportunity to come in and win the conference in year one. I have a lot of good, fun followers from the Utah fan base. I just was a little bit caught off guard, like I said, with how strongly they believe, hey, this is our conference, not just of the future, but right now, this year. I agree you guys are among the contenders, but as we talked about in the open, I wouldn't go as far as to say that any singular team, it's their conference, especially this year as everybody's getting more familiar with the new composition of the 16 teams.
Part of it's also born from the success they've had in a Pac-12 conference that they don't realize has actually been, frankly, and top to bottom inferior to the Big 12 from a depth standpoint. That's the whole thing. Like, I'm not saying that, and look, last year was the best year the Pac-12 has had, period, in years. Like, yep. They saved the best for last. If they'd have been that good for a while, maybe they'd still be here. Probably not. Leadership, what it being what it is. But, like, I do think they are coming into a more difficult top to bottom conference. And look, if you wanted to do something in the Big 12, like last year to me was the down year for the conference. I think the conference as a whole is starting to climb back up on its up cycle from a development standpoint. It's why you have 10 teams that we're talking about here. I am curious. We're not going to go too much longer. We'll get you back on again soon. I want to talk about a couple of things here. Arizona, Oklahoma State is interesting. You have Arizona finishing. OSU, Arizona, you've got like a 0.1 differential in win here. But Arizona gets the 0.1 difference, which is interesting because Arizona you have as your ranking of 26, then Oklahoma State is 21. OSU's rating is 11. Arizona's 9.7. So they're very close here. What is giving Arizona that slight edge in your numbers from a projection standpoint?
The easier conference schedule. That's what it boils down to. Arizona, by my numbers, has the third easiest conference schedule. They do play Kansas State, as we mentioned, but that is not a conference game. They actually don't play Oklahoma State, which is going to give them an easier schedule because Oklahoma State, as you mentioned, is a good power-rated team. They don't play Kansas. They don't play Iowa State. These are other power-rated teams that are at least at the mid-level of the conference. If you go to Oklahoma State, it's the 9th most difficult conference schedule. They do avoid Kansas. They do avoid Iowa State. But it's just a more difficult conference schedule, not just in the teams that you play, but even the location of those games. If you look at that, like Oklahoma State has to go to Kansas State. They have to go to TCU, who's power rated in the mid 30s. They get Utah at home, West Virginia at home, but just from a schedule difficulty standpoint, that's the difference. Even though my numbers suggest Oklahoma State is a very slightly better football team overall, Arizona gets the ever so slight nod in the conference win projections because they're facing that much easier of a schedule within conference play.
Yeah, OSU's stretch of starting conference play with Utah at Kansas State and then West Virginia is we're going to know, we'll know if OSU is going to make it to Arlington or not by week 6.
Absolutely. Because, Philip, I think if Oklahoma State, certainly if they're 3-0, they're legit, you're feeling really good. And then you're like, okay, we got a bye week. Then you go to BYU on a Friday night. Don't overlook that. And then at Baylor before, you come back home for an Arizona State team. Like, you could easily start stacking some wins. And not easily. You could start stacking some wins there. Even at 2-1 through that stretch, you're feeling really good. But the opportunity to go 1-2 or worse is certainly there because, right out of the gate, number 19 power rated at home, number 17 on the road, number 36 at home. I'd have to do a deep dive. I don't think there is another Big 12 team that has their first 3 conference games against that level of competition.
That's just a gnarly, not just the top 3, but that's a really gnarly 3-game stretch period. And outside of being the worst, like if you're Arizona State, you're going to have some really tough stretches because you're projected as the worst team in conference. But from a standpoint of looking at the teams we consider contenders, that's a really tough stretch. And having to play Utah, Kansas State, from a standpoint of style of play, the physicality both Utah and Kansas State bring, to have to play those teams back to back, and then play a West Virginia team that's going to be good. Like, that is, that is just survive. That is survive, advance, and just get to the idle week. Hopefully, not too beat up, that you can then make it through the rest of the season. I know there's a lot of teams that we're not going to get to today. Like I said, we're going to get you on again soon. I do want to talk about, as I tweeted, I'm calling UCF. I think I'm settling them on them as my dark horse because they're the team that I see I have the most question marks about, but can kind of see a path for, compared to I'm higher on Iowa State than I am UCF. I'm higher on Kansas than I am UCF. I'm not calling Texas Tech a dark horse because I don't see it yet with them. I think they're still going to be another year away. I'm not as high on TCU. West Virginia, I think, could be there again. But UCF's that team where I have both the least and most confidence, is a weird way of putting it. And that's kind of how I'm starting to treat my dark horse of like, I can see a path, but it's going to require A, B, C, D, and E to happen. But the path is there. Walk me through UCF and your opinion on them as a potential dark horse in the Big 12 this year.
Well, we've talked so much about schedule difficulty, and in particular conference schedule difficulty. And we talked about Kansas State, Utah, Arizona. In terms of conference schedule difficulty, that's the easiest, second easiest, and third easiest. To get to the fourth easiest, and those are three of the top 4 power rated teams. To get to the fourth easiest conference schedule, you're looking at UCF. So like right there, just right off the top, you have one of the top 4 easiest conference schedules, and you are not one of the top 3 or 4 projected teams from a power rating standpoint, which means your true strength of schedule difficulty here is actually pretty low, which is encouraging for UCF fans. From a power rating standpoint, it's interesting because I agree with you, Philip. There is a path. They are within that top 10 teams that I said realistically could make a chance. From a projection standpoint, UCF is worse across the board. Their overall power rating is down 5 spots from a year ago. Their offense is projected to be down 12 spots. The defense down 2, and the special teams remains exactly where it was, which is encouraging, but not when you dive into what that is. That's number 121 out of 134. So certainly want to see some improvement in the special teams department, even though that, of course, the of the 3 phases, the one that impacts teams the least naturally. I tweeted with my UCF graphic, 4th easiest conference schedule. To me, the interesting thing, Philip, comes to how well is this team going to do on the road? How many wins can they pick up on the road? Because when I look at their home conference slate, Colorado, Cincinnati, BYU, Arizona, it's going to be a tricky one. Right now, I have a 49% win expectancy for UCF in that one, so it's a toss-up, almost 50-50. And then you close the year against Utah. But if you're in contention for a spot in Arlington in that home game against Utah, like I don't care how everything's gone, you absolutely have a chance to win that game. Even right now, 41% chance for UCF. To me, it's how well can this team play on the road? Because they open Big 12 play at TCU. They go to Iowa State, and then they go to Arizona State, a game that you would hopefully, as a team that has aspirations to be in Arlington, hope that you'd win. And then you play at West Virginia, coming off of an off week. So you do have a week to prepare for that road trip to Morgantown. How many of those games can you win? Because if you can win, what I say, there 1, 2, 3, 4 games, this is a big task. But if you can win 3 of those 4, maybe even 2 is enough if you take care of all your business at home. If you can win 3 of those 4, you are absolutely in a great spot when it comes to projecting your chances to make it to Arlington for that Big 12 championship game. So to me, that's really what stands out. Is it's one of the easier conference schedules in terms of my preseason power ratings, version 1, of course. And then can you travel on the road and pick up some wins? Because if they can, this is a team that, even though their power rating is at number 40, that's not a profile you typically expect to be competing for a Power 4 conference championship. But if they can pick up some wins on the road, maybe some unexpected ones, I see the path, and that's what you're asking for. What's the path? It's road wins for me, for UCF. And some people will say you can say that about a lot of teams, and I guess to an extent that's right. But it's especially true for UCF when you truly dive into their schedule.
Arizona UCF being a conference game is just my brain still can't wrap around that. I can't get that. Also, that UCF plays all 4 of the corner 4 this year is wild to me. The team in Florida will host Utah and Colorado and Arizona. That's 3 of them. So three of the most westernly teams in the conference. 4 is BYU. So like I said, okay, 4 of the most western teams in the conference have to travel to Florida to play UCF, and UCF travels to Arizona State. And those are conference games.
I did not even realize that. That is a really good point out right there.
Like, it's not just that you get, BYU, Arizona, Colorado. Like, those teams way out west have to travel all the way to Florida to play a game. So does Utah at the end of the year. UCF has one long travel, I guess it would be fair to say. Being at Arizona State, Iowa State's a little bit of a way, but not too bad. That's wild to me. Like, and that plays into the whole schedule idea of 4 teams have to travel almost across the country to come play you in a football game. That plays in your favor for UCF here.
It absolutely does. And, there's data that supports this at the college and NFL levels, traveling from West Coast to East Coast versus East Coast to West Coast. Like, there's a difference in that too, with what it does to your body clock and all of those things. How much of a difference over the course in any given game, it might not be a lot over the course of the season when you're doing it multiple times, that really does add up. And yeah, as you mentioned that, Philip, I'm just looking to see, okay, well, what teams doesn't UCF play? It's Baylor, Houston, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, Texas Tech. I feel like I've talked a lot on this podcast today about the schedule difficulty, in particular the conference schedule difficulty, because in the preseason, when we're projecting forward, that is equally important. I won't say more important, but that is equally important to your actual power rating. Like, how this plays out. You're playing 9 conference games, but you're also missing 6 teams. You're not playing 6 out of the possible 15 conference opponents, of course, yourself not included there, the 16-member composition. It is critically important, not just who you play and where you play them, but who do you not play. And this is the time of year from June, July, and August to be talking about that, because once we get into the season, spoiler alert, that actually falls off of my team graphics altogether, because at that point, this stuff no longer matters. We're talking about any given week. What's the matchup? How does it go? But in this part of the year, this is where we really need to set the stage for how can a team season go, for better or for worse, due in large part to the schedule that they play, and equally important, what teams in their conference do they not play?
Kelley, it is always a pleasure. We're going to get you back on because we got to talk about some more of these teams. There's a lot of storylines here. Again, there's 16 teams, folks. It was one thing when there was 10. We could sit here and break everything down. Otherwise, we'd have a 4-hour podcast, and I can't do that. So we're going to get you back in. We're going to get you back on again soon. I promise we won't wait till August to do that. Again, plug it all. Where can everybody check out all the projections, the team breakdown, the conference breakdown? Where can they find everything?
Yeah, well, Philip, again, I really appreciate 1012 Network. Really special podcast for me. Going back, a few years now. You're always great. Your listeners are great. I love hearing from them. Really, the Big 12 Conference is it's really special. The fan bases are awesome. You can find my work, my content on X. KFordRatings is the handle. You can also find it on the website, KFordRatings.com. For now, those are the 2 best places to keep up with it all. Again, like you talked about earlier, I'm happy to engage and go back and forth with folks. If you've got questions or don't understand something about, the graphic or the projection, certainly happy to do that. If we can keep it respectful and, be adults about it, then that's certainly going to increase your chances of getting some interaction with me. But I love going back and forth with Big 12 fans when done the right way. You guys have a special conference, and I'm really, really excited to see how it all plays out, because like we said, there's 10 teams that might make a run to Arlington. Which 10 is anybody's guess, and that's what we're doing, talking about it. I absolutely love it.
Now's the time to save 30% on wedding jewelry, only on BlueNile.com. Make sure your wedding ring is the one, with your pick of diamond and lab-grown diamond bands, all hand-finished and graded for excellence. Or surprise her with something blue she'll love for life, like a stunning pair of sapphire earrings. Blue Nile's jewelry experts are available 24/7 to help, from fit questions to style advice. Right now, get up to 30% off at BlueNile.com. BlueNile.com.
It's a big story in Big 12 softball. Some very shocking, startling, and tough to hear allegations regarding the Houston softball program. This coming from a recent podcast episode from our Houston podcast here in the 1012 Network, the Scott and Holman podcast. Joining us is one of the 3 guys behind that show, Dustin, to kind of break down what's going on, what we know so far, what they have been told. Dustin, welcome to the 1012, man.
Hey, thanks for having me, Philip.
Absolutely. I'll start by saying anyone who wants to know more, we're going to kind of touch on this here, but they should go and listen to the episode. It is live now You've had quite a response to it. And let me preface by saying, if I was worried about the due diligence you guys have taken in before you went to air with this, I wouldn't feel comfortable bringing you on here. And so I feel like you guys have done your due diligence. You have crossed your T's and dotted your I's as best as you possibly can to make sure this information is as accurate as it can be. But some interesting. We're going to stick with allegations because that have been brought forward by some currently unnamed sources because they prefer to stay anonymous about some things that have gone on with the Houston softball program this year and in previous seasons as well. Dustin, there's two primary things. Why don't you kind of go do us a favor and kind of highlight what those two main points have been so far?
Yeah, I think the main one is the gun allegation, which is in a nutshell that there was a player for U of H last year. This player was named to us by a lot of individuals. Obviously, we chose not to name this player. Just referred to her as Player A in our episode. And what was brought to us, the allegations were that this player not only had a gun on her most of the time throughout the season at home and on road trips, but also over multiple instances threatened multiple players with that gun, and that several players brought concerns about this to Coach Vesley, the head coach for the UH softball program, that Coach Vesley essentially just didn't do anything about it, that they brought their concerns to U of H athletic director Chris Pesman, as well as an assistant athletic director as well, and that they kind of got the same thing where they said that they were going to look into it and then just kind of never followed up and have stopped kind of returning the calls of the players in question who were wanting to know if more was going to happen. The statement that we got from U of H, we asked them a number of questions. The only thing they really addressed was the gun allegation, and they said that U of H police looked into the allegation and were not able to substantiate it, was their quote. Not to get too far ahead of ourselves, a little, some of the things that we've heard before and since then, I'll be a little bit cryptic in here and say that if you're going to try to substantiate allegations, you got to talk to the people who saw it and made the allegations, and it doesn't seem like a whole lot of that happened. So that is an issue, I think, that still needs to be addressed. And then on top of that, there was, again, this kind of didn't appear to come out of nowhere. So one of the other things that we heard is, really from everyone, is just that there's a culture at U of H softball of that if anyone raises any concerns to anybody outside of the program, that what happens is nothing happens other than that player's name gets immediately leaked back to Coach Vesley, who would then retaliate against the player in question. And that kind of points to the fact that this is not the first problem, the first incident, the first time that players have not felt safe in the program due to Coach Vesley's leadership, as it was explained to us. Number of other allegations that we make in the podcast, up to and including, players being denied food that the, team nutritionist thought that they needed at different times, being forced to, long bus trips followed by practices, and not being given food during that incident, during, that time period as well. So just a lot of allegations going back over her several years as the head coach of U of H that we were told there. And like you mentioned, our due diligence, there's stuff that we heard that we would have loved to include, but only one source would bring it to us, and only one source had a firsthand allegation, and we weren't able to substantiate that with other firsthand allegations. So we sat on, as much as we talked about a lot of things and brought forth a lot of allegations that very shocking to a lot of people, there's stuff that we sat on because we couldn't corroborate it. So I think if anything, the episode that we did, as you're listening to it, I really feel it's not the case that we're making stuff up and going too far. It's the case that we are still, even with that episode, only scratching the surface. And based on some of the outreach that we've gotten since that episode aired, I think that really, really solidified in all of our minds that all we've done thus far is scratch the surface, not do a comprehensive accounting of all the kind of problems that were going on and all of the things that happened that created, like the name of our episode was, an unsafe and toxic culture in the program.
Some other things you guys mentioned, obviously, allegations of players being belittled and berated, both players and assistant coaches and staff, pitting players against one another, encouraging players to fight. It definitely does not come across like a place that is a healthy place for players to play. And again, the fact that you're telling us now that after recording this episode, I mean, you, as you said, you've had other players, former players or sources, let's just say sources, reach out to you and continue to provide more information, and there being more allegations that you have not brought forth because here, there, and look, we've had enough situations like this across sports and in different places and different times that, yes, sometimes you get a disgruntled person, sometimes you get an angry former player, sometimes you get an axe to grind. In this case, you have had enough people come and talk to you independently and have independent conversations, not as a group, not in a group think or a mob setting, as a one-on-one conversations, supply you with similar stories and similar tales or information about the same incidents. Yeah. That this is not a one individual who's upset or a couple players who were scorned. This is enough data and enough information and enough individual sources to say there is legitimately something here going on at the University of Houston softball that is a concern, are major red flags, and have thus far, it seems, not been addressed, at least publicly, by the University of Houston's athletic department.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, the episode that we published was based on extensive conversations that we had with 6 sources, which was a combination of players and staff that have been under Coach Vesley. And the number of players and staff that have reached out to us since the episode, in the less than 48 hours since the episode dropped, easily double that. And then some, both players and staff, again, reaching out. And the number, and that's just the people that we've had conversations with. The number of players that have reached out, the number of staff that have reached out and not been comfortable even anonymously commenting, but just saying thank you for doing this episode. The number of players that have liked and retweeted the episode, I think, is a large number as well. And the number of more people that we've said are, hey, I've been talking to so and so. They really want to comment, but they're just really scared about this and they need more time to think about it. Speaks to that, like you said, it's not a couple people. And even if the 6 people we had talked to had been, one person comes to us and says, hey, I've got my 5 friends and they're all going to say the same thing as me, I think we would have really thought twice about whether or not we wanted to go through with that. That wasn't the case. We had people that came to us. We had people that we independently reached out to that weren't, part of the group that, came to us. As you said, we talked to everybody individually. We never sat down and had any group conversations. We didn't want anyone kind of putting stories into other people's heads that they didn't actually independently remember on their own. So yeah, it's been just an absolute flood of people. And I've, again, even people that we've reached out to that just said, the entire community of former players and former staff of Coach Vesley, everyone is just happy to see that some of this is finally seeing the light of day, and that, maybe there will finally be some consequences for what she's been doing. It is
interesting. We've kept an eye on Coach Vesley in Houston this year, first year in the Big 12 for Houston, and the information that we had is that this would have been the final year of her contract. Now, Joseph Duarte, who covers Houston quite extensively, had noted recently that she has 1 year left on her contract. Not sure when that occurred, because every reporting that we have found up to this point was that the 2024 season would have been the last year, which has made it kind of interesting this offseason, given everything that has gone down, to be this quiet about the program and no word here or there about her future as the head coach of Houston Cougars. And so this is a story that you guys are going to continue to follow. I'm sure there will be follow-up episodes as you continue to gather more information and more sources come forward. I'm not going to encourage anyone to do anything from a feeling like they need to go on the record. We never want to pressure anyone to do anything. But if you are someone who has been connected to the Houston softball program, you want to share a story of your own, if you have something that happened, Dustin, where can those people be able to reach out to you and talk to you, whether anonymously or in some way, to make sure that obviously players even no longer with the program don't feel comfortable publicly putting their name out, which is also tells you a lot about maybe the state of the culture there at the University of Houston softball program. Where can they go and do that?
Yeah, there's a number of ways you can get in contact with us. You can email us. Our email is sh, as in Scott and Holman Podcast, and we've got a little pun in there, so it's shpawd and then cast, C-A-S-T, Pawdcast at gmail.com is our email. We are real active on Twitter. Our handle there is SH Podcast. You can reach out. Our DMs are open, I believe. We've been trying to follow back everyone that's following us right now, because I know that there's the owner of that site has done some nonsense where even if people have open DMs, if they don't follow you, you can't DM them unless you have the whatever. So we're not going to go into that, but we'll absolutely try to be available to you on Twitter at SH Podcasts, or like I said, shpodcast at gmail.com. Let us know. We are happy to listen to anyone that has information that they want to reach out anonymously. And we've been doing a lot of that. And I kind of get the sense that for a lot of people, as much as anything, this is maybe a form of like therapy, that they just, they finally have someone who's listening to them, and they felt like no one has been listening to them for a long time as they've been saying these things. So a lot of people just reaching out, if you just want to tell your story, even if it's like you said, we've had players that are not in the program anymore, are not in college softball anymore, do not have jobs in softball, and they still are like scared of this woman and scared to speak up for fear of what the consequences might be. So we definitely understand that, and we are happy to take any information anonymously, but absolutely, kind of like you said, we are definitely hoping going forward that we would love to find one or more. I want to say brave individual, but I think everyone that's speaking to us even anonymously is a brave individual, just because that's been really, really hard. And like I said, we've had people that have indicated to us that they wanted to talk to us, but they are too worried to even do so anonymously. And a lot of that gets back to, like we said, that there's just been this culture within U of H. Players have gotten burned in the past, bringing concerns to administration and having not only not having their concerns addressed, but immediately having their identity as someone who raised a concern gets right back to Coach Vesely. So there's a lot of gun-shy individuals out there who I think even anonymously are afraid to speak out. So I totally understand that there hasn't been anyone yet willing to put their name on the record, but I'm hoping that happens. I think that's probably the next step that we need in order to get more eyeballs on this, to blend more legitimacy to what we're saying. Because I understand. I think the people that know us, the people that have been following us for years, have a pretty good sense we didn't just make this up for fun. But I do understand how someone from a bigger media corporation who doesn't know us is going to say, okay, all we've got so far is three guys making up stories. And I think the fact that go look at the episode, go look at the likes and the retweets and the comments on the episode, you're going to find a lot of players that played for Coach Vesely. And I think that gives a pretty strong indication that we aren't entirely making stuff up, pulling stuff out of our backsides or anything like that. But like I said, we definitely want to keep reporting this. We have heard so much from so many people. Honestly, we're still kind of wading through it all. We've just been kind of taking turns responding to different individuals, reaching out and like, hey, you talk to this person, you talk to this person, just because literally we've gotten so much response for one of us to try to get back to everyone would have been overwhelming at this point. So that's where we're at. Like you said, would love to have more individuals with firsthand knowledge of the things that went on behind the scenes for Cougar softball under Coach Vesely. Would love to have those people reach out and talk to us.
I know you guys, big fans of Houston, want to see this program in a good spot, in a good place, and moving in the right direction. As someone who's a fan of the Big 12 and as a softball fan, I would also like to see Houston feel like that is a program moving in the right direction. It does not feel like that at this point, and both on the field and off. And so it's going to be very interesting over the next few weeks and months to see where this goes. Look, we're just being honest. Most of the time it's going to take someone's going to have to go on the record for the kind of media to pick it up that would, I want to say, force the school's hand to actually take this stuff seriously and do a real look and figure out what it is that's going on and if something needs to be done with the program. Because right now, based off of these stories from these individuals, something does. We'll continue to listen and you guys are on YouTube. You guys have the episode everywhere it's available. Scott and Holman Podcast. If you're a softball fan, a Houston fan, a Big 12 fan, I suggest you go and listen. It's not a super long episode, but it's very informative. Like we've seen this kind of stuff before. Texas Tech has gone through this with multiple softball coaches as well. These things happen. And it seems they tend to happen a lot more with sports that don't have the attention of football and basketball. And because there is less scrutiny, obvious, and less eyeballs on things, this kind of stuff can happen more often because there's less oversight. And so that former players are coming forward, and that you provided them an avenue to try and help make change at a place that you love and that they obviously love at Houston, I think is an important thing to do. And you guys keep up the good work with this.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I mean, one thing that we've heard kind of independently without from several of the sources that we've talked to is that they love the University of Houston. Even former players that we've talked to, we kind of asked, I would totally understand, even as someone that loves the University of Houston, I would totally understand someone having those experiences if that soured them on the entire university. It's exactly the opposite. Everything we're hearing is, I love the University of Houston. I loved absolutely everything about my time at the University of Houston, other than having to play for Coach Vesely. And, if I could do it again, I would, the thing that I would want more than anything would be to play for the University of Houston for any other coach. So that's where it's, again, this is not coming from people that are angry at the university more broadly and trying to bring it down. It's the opposite. This is being brought forward by both the sources that have been talking to us, as well as obviously, Sam, Bobby, and myself. We're all saying these things because we love the University of Houston, and we love University of Houston softball. I mean, we've been going to games for well over a decade, traveled to multiple regionals. I got myself ejected from a Cougar softball game several years ago, just from yelling at the umpires a little bit too hard, getting a little bit too fired up. It's, again, we're not coming to this as people that are just like muckrakers looking to cause trouble. We're here because we love this program very, very much, and we want to see it better than it is now. And that's true in terms of the on the field results, which are obviously less important than just players feeling safe in the program. But then more importantly, we want, first and foremost, everyone wants to win games, but the foundation that you build wins upon has to be a softball program where your players feel safe and feel valued as human beings by the coach that is there. And everything we've heard is that that's just not the case.
All right, Dustin, we're going to get you out of here. Everybody, make sure you go check out that episode that is up and live now. Dustin, one more time, for those who might be interested in reaching out to you guys, where can they do so?
Yeah, once again, shpodcast@gmail.com, shpodcast, and podcast has got the pun, so it's PAWD, like because Cougars have paws, shpodcast@gmail.com, and then the same pun, shpodcast on Twitter.
Podcast Network.